Okay, thank you so much for being with us today. Just a short introduction from my side for all of you. We have Bjorn-Soren Gigler, Senior Digital Innovation Policy Officer, Directorate-General for Communications Networks, Content and Technology within European Commission. Hello and thank you. Mr. Harald Gruber, Head of Digital Infrastructure Division, European Investment Bank. Hello and welcome. Mr. Bogdan Chirițoiu, President of the Romanian Competition Council. Hello and welcome. And Mr. Oleg Roibu, Head of Public Policy within IMAG. Hello and welcome. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being today with us. We have the honor to host the first panel. And I think there are already many topics which have been raised in the first opening speeches, and just to go straight to the topic, we face some challenges, and we want to reach this single digital market in European Union, but in the same time we face some barriers. We face maybe unnecessary regulatory barriers and all kinds of barriers and other challenges. So from your perspective, how can we cope with these barriers? How can we break these barriers in order to reach a bigger objective, the digital single market? So from left to right, so from...
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me. And so I work directly in the Digital Single Market Directorate, so it's a really good question. So for us, one of the key opportunities, I think digital transformation is changing our lives. The technologies like artificial intelligence, blockchain, IoT will completely not just change our work life, but our personal lives, and it has tremendous opportunities. But we have to come together. And there I wanted to raise, actually it was already mentioned before, by you, the citizens. Maybe let me start completely the other way. Let's start with the citizens. Why are we doing this? For what? What is the digital single market? How can we actually explain this to you that it's much more concrete? So, for instance, one thing we implemented is the roaming charges. So when you now travel across Europe, you don't pay for roaming anymore. So that was one policy change, a huge policy change, regulation, which in fact has direct impacted in a positive way every citizen. Another example to give you is content. So in terms they call it, that basically when you are traveling that you could see content wherever you are. So that has no boundaries, no borders anymore. In technical we call this geo-blocking. So anyway, if you want to see any content and you're not in your own country, you're not able to see it. So you can travel freely, but you cannot yet have content. So actually we have 5 C's. So the first we already said, citizens, to really engage citizens. Second is content. So it's all about actually not just the hardware, but what do we do with the internet. And there we work a lot on blockchain and Internet of Values, that we can trust content as well. The third is connectivity. So we still have issues of connectivity in particularly rural areas. And it's not the same as was just mentioned by Juan Navas, that there is still issues of actually increasing digital divide. I just looked at the digital gender divide. So there's actually still an issue that women have less access than men, and also digital skills. The third is capacity, skills. It's all about skills. So how can we actually catch up almost with technology? You know, technology is like a revolution. It's going so fast that we actually sometimes, as citizens, have issues to fully comprehend. What does that mean? What does artificial intelligence, IoT, or blockchain really mean for me as a person, for my future job opportunities and also in my actually everyday life. And the fifth, and then I wanted to finish, is I call it continuity or sustainability. So basically have a long breath. It's not, I've seen it over my career in the last 20 years. I started working on the internet in 1989, actually through Development Gateway we did in Romania early on in the 90s. So the key issue is you need a long breath, continuity. So it's not just following the peaks, but continuously working on this topic over the long time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this invitation. Now, concerning the digital single market, I think I would like to make three major points. It's basically, first of all, what you need to have a digital single market, you have to have the basic rights. So basically, you need to have an infrastructure that is high performance and available everywhere. Otherwise, you would have not a single market, you would have a segmented market. That's clearly not what it means. So this means that we need to have an infrastructure that is present everywhere. So there should not be excluded regions and very high performance as well. Now think about what is the challenge we have to on the fixed side, you have to make sure that fiber is available everywhere, and also for mobiles that basically you have a coordinated rollout of 5G across all countries in a way that you can immediately start pan-European services, because otherwise it doesn't make sense just to have a sort of a patchwork of infrastructure. Second, what you need is you need companies which are on one hand capable of offering new types of equipment, new types of services that are relevant for digitalization. So that's because the economy goes towards digitalization. You need to have a supply infrastructure which is capable of delivering it. At the moment, we are extremely dependent on that from inventions that are made outside the Union. So mostly it's American, but also Chinese more and more. But this is a key condition also to have a digital single market, that you get inventors and startup companies that produce technologies that are basically made for the European market, because there is always a bias in the invention that's always towards certain regions, towards certain languages, towards certain cultures. So that's very important. And at the same time, you need also companies which are capable of adopting digitalization, which are able to transform their sectors. So you need to have, on the one other hand, companies that are capable of doing that. Large corporate, they're sometimes very heavy, but they are capable of doing it. But what you especially need, that SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, are capable of absorbing digital innovations. And there, it comes to the need that you have the skills available, that basically there's sufficient skills for the companies that basically these technologies can permeate the industrial sector. And then last but not least, you need to have an education sector which is capable of providing basically the skills that are necessary for digitalization. So these are, in my view, the three main aims for which the elaboration of the digital single market should work on.
Thank you so much. Just before moving forward and adding to the first questions I put in the beginning, because you mentioned something very interesting. You mentioned about how can we make the European Union more competitive? How can we build products and services within the European Union, considering the competition of other areas? Let's put it this way. So, moving forward to Mr. Chirițoiu, because he has a lot of expertise in this area. We talk about the challenges and the unnecessary barriers we face. How can we move forward, but keeping in the same time a fair context and a fair competition in all of this?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be here with such a large and positive crowd, because it's true, at least the area I'm coming from, which is antitrust, which is not DG Connect. Yeah, it's more antitrust. We have a lot of events on digital, but they're a bit depressing. Yeah, with the tendency from, again, the crowd I'm usually getting together with is to see the glass, the empty part of the glass. And it's very good that you see here people who are positive and passionate about the changes which are happening. So I prepared a few points. I'll get to your question. Maybe the first is not that necessary for this crowd, because the first thing I wanted to say is that let's see the good things that are happening. I think the digitization of the economy, it's positive for the European consumers, it's positive for the Romanian consumers, and it's positive for the Romanian economy. The fact that a few thousand people now in Romania generate as much GDP or more GDP than the millions of people who work in agriculture or the hundreds of thousands of people who work in construction, it shows the tremendous potential that this industry has, again, in changing for better the life of people, but also in developing the Romanian economy. We have a trade surplus on IT services. So we in Romania, and it's true that all the all the countries in the eastern part of the European Union, yeah, are doing well on ITC in terms of economic development. Now, how could we governments facilitate this? I'm normally a very reluctant regulator. I think the job of government is especially not to stay in the way, create the right framework, and then the markets will tend to take care of themselves. One issue, and again, Europe is a bit depressing here. Yeah? I think that we're complaining a lot that there are no European champions, that all big ITC companies are Americans or Chinese, but on the other hand, we are much more reluctant to let innovation go forward than apparently other parts of the world. Romania, luckily, now I'm more parochial. Yeah? I'm very much focused on what's happening in Romania. Romania, luckily, I think is a better position because we're not very good at association. Mr. Joanna said that the participation of Romanians in different forms of social organization is low. Sometimes this is good. Yeah, because cartels or blocking innovations are more difficult to be created in Romania than in other countries. Our colleagues in Bulgaria understood were able to scare Uber off very quickly. Yeah. When Uber entered the Bulgarian market, it was very quickly kicked out. In Romania, luckily, it took 4 years. Yeah, understood Uber has been here for 4 years. It took 4 years. Till this year, I have not realized, and I was very happy, there was no opposition to Uber. So I think our taxi drivers were slow. And now probably it's too late to stop Uber in Romania, as it happened in some other parts of Europe. So in this sense, I think somehow our task in Romania is easier because the resistance in the society is not as big as in other parts of Europe. But one of the key things that we have to say, we have to keep markets open, contestable, not allow incumbents and vested interests to block innovation. And politically, yeah, the hottest topic now is what do we do with ride sharing and how we succeed. I hope in the last 2 weeks till the government is legally allowed to pass emergency ordinances, we'll be able to pass legislation that fairly regulates ride sharing. I have the feeling we're going to have the same issue about Airbnb soon if I look at the drafts in Parliament on the tourist law. Yeah, this I see the storms coming, the clouds coming. Yeah? So I think, okay, this would be a first task. Make sure that there is room for innovation. Does it mean I'm completely opposed to regulation? No. I think it makes sense to regulate these new technologies, but we should do it in a way that's adapted to their specificity. I don't like this argument, we have a law, everybody has to comply with the law. No, the law has to adapt to life, to reality, to technology. So I prefer to talk about equally effective regulation. So regulation that is there to protect the same legitimate public interest goals like safety, different forms of safety. Yeah? So, okay, but does not have to, you don't have to do it in exactly the same way as you do it for traditional industries, because technology allows you to do it in a different way, in a better way, smarter way, lighter way. Okay, this would be one point. Still, here on innovation, we are good, the ITC industry is strong, and we have relatively less resistance than in other countries to innovation. Still, we are the only country in the European Union out of 28 member states that has not been able yet to transpose the Payment Services Directive 2. Yeah, that's a question mark, yeah. Why, again, country apparently open and nice and we want to do stuff, and still on payments and on banking, we seem to be the laggards of Europe. Does it mean, again, I'm not completely against my colleagues from antitrust, from more larger, more developed countries, yeah, who seem to be much more concerned with regulating and stopping large companies from abusing their position. Yeah. So, okay, I understand there could be issues here. On the other hand, I think it's in the nature of this new economy that you are going to develop relatively quickly big companies, because okay, network, that's our language. Network effects, winner takes all economies and all this stuff. But I think we have to get used to it, and it's better again to leave markets contestable, because what grows quickly will also be able to fall quickly, yeah, if companies do not adapt. The idea that we could break up this type of companies, which in my mind are sort of natural monopolies because of network effects, I don't really see how this could be done. That's an agenda in US, yeah, they're talking about breaking up, yeah, they tried to break up Microsoft, if I remember correctly, the Clinton administration now, then this current administration is talking about breaking up Apple, or I don't know whom. We in Europe, we are tempted by this type of discussions. To be honest, I'm skeptical. I think it's more important to keep things, again, open, because companies that were scary a few years ago, they are not that scary anymore. We're not talking about breaking up Microsoft anymore. Now we're talking about companies that did not exist, basically, when we're talking about breaking up Microsoft. Yeah, so I think, yeah, markets take care of themselves, yeah, if you just don't intervene too much. Intervening too much. I'm in two minds about GDPR. I understand concern for privacy, and we have to balance out the different public interests. So innovation, development is one goal. Protection of privacy, it's also a legitimate goal. But I'm afraid that, from my perspective, GDPR, maybe not, if it's not rightly used, is going to be an instrument to protect incumbents and to create barriers to enter in markets. And I think that's something like banking. That's something we have to be careful about. And my final point, because the moderator is getting restless, I think this type of economy where physical barriers are definitely less important in other sectors, I think it's prone to pan-European regulation. I see less scope for national regulation and more for pan-European regulation. I think that's your job, to make sure that you create a system in Europe that it's consistent and we don't break up the internet in national ones. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, Mr. Roibu, how do you see it from one of the biggest companies in Romania and one of the well-recognized brands we have locally here?
We usually do not use the word big if we discuss about competition. So we used to say that we are one of the most relevant player in Central and Eastern Europe in the retail market. from our perspective, there is still a lot of fragmentation, and digital single market as a strategy focused on avoiding the barriers and making the digital single market similar to the single market. But even the recent piece of legislations that were adopted during the last commissions contained still some possibilities for the member states to decide in a different direction. And the effect of this situation is actually still maintaining barriers and still maintaining this situation when you need to pass the screening of 28 sets of authorities in order to become relevant at the level of the European Union. And here we do not speak only about the competition authority, we speak about the consumer protection authority, we speak about the data protection authorities and many other authorities in different member states, because for example in Romania the local police has some duties concerning the e-commerce which is strange. It is clear that their involvement in e-commerce is focused on the local companies, because they wouldn't be able to involve in the businesses outside of Romania or outside of European Union. Speaking about this set of authorities, when you come from a small market as Romania it's quite difficult to break the barriers and to try to become European champions, because we speak about the European champions, but we need to do a little bit more, because when you come from a small market in Romania, you need dimension. When you reach that dimension, let's say in countries of Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, then the discussion about your dimension comes. You face discussions on dominant position or alleged abuse of dominant position and so on, which creates difficulties in order to expand. The same about the mergers and acquisitions, because it takes too much time in order to expand. And I'm not speaking here about Romania, I'm speaking about mainly Central and Eastern Europe, where we actually operate. And maybe here we need to be a little bit open, at least to try to discuss some proposals or some ideas, because, for example, there are some member states like France that is proposing a sort of adaptation where at least to look into this matter to see how we can create European champions, because I mean, of course, they have a case there, and they are trying to change the things in a particular direction. But we could feel, and we know that such type of barriers are present everywhere in Europe. And in the same time, we need to look a little bit outside of European Union, because when we speak about, for instance, e-commerce, we speak about global players. And there are some issues there as well. And I think, and our experience actually shows that there were some problems that were addressed through legislation, but that legislation couldn't be enforced enough in order to protect. And I'll give you the example with VAT and custom duties, because the parcels that come outside of Europe, usually they are delivered as being gifts. So there is a huge task for the postal operators, but in the same time we feel that we do not play a level playing field, because in Europe we need to pay the VAT, all the customs duties and so on, and if you just receive some parcels outside of Europe I mean, you do not know how to manage them, then it's a problem in this regard. So just to conclude on this part of the panel, I would say that there is a huge potential. We need to assess the fact that there are still barriers. We need to address them. And most probably, I would also recommend to see the technology as a strategic direction of European community. And in this regard, not to speak only about European champions, but to do something for them. So to create some sort of smart regulation in order to be able to grow those champions. Otherwise, in 5 years, we'll have the same discussion about, the willingness to have European champions, but in the same time, the situation that we do not have them and we do not know how to grow them.
Thank you so much. Since the topic of this discussion is digital, we somehow get this idea of technology, and many of you, actually all of you, mentioned somehow technology in the discussion. You mentioned a bit of artificial intelligence, IoT, 5G. Very quickly, from your perspective, which technology or technologies, but a very short number, a very small number, which technologies do you consider as being most disruptive or having the biggest impact in the near future within European Union? And how can we make a positive impact out of this impact or out of this disruption?
So I think it's all about the convergence of technology. So it's basically artificial intelligence, blockchain, and IoT, Internet of Things, but together. So basically, it's not that one technology on its own will be so disruptive, but the convergence of the technology. Now, these are huge opportunities, and blockchain, for instance, can be used much more than cryptocurrency. So blockchain is much more than Bitcoin. So basically, just talking about governance and public services. So blockchain, why is it such a revolution? Why does it disrupt? It brings us back to the origins of the internet, meaning a decentralized system where you as a user can take back control over your own data. That's why it can be really disruptive, and it addresses the main challenge we all have today in using the internet. It's trust. You cannot trust people or transactions anymore. So you need cybersecurity, you need a safe system, and blockchain is the technology of the future, which will allow you, again, to have transactions facilitated through a trusted environment. That's why this is so important. But I think it's a convergence of all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, clearly those different items are interrelated, but I believe that the Internet of Things is probably the most, how shall I say, influential component in the new world of the digital economy, because we were before used that only persons would communicate to each other. The fact that you start now thinking that all items could in principle have a sort of a communication device and simply coordinate or communicate with each other, with other items, it is really, the sky is the limit in somehow in the imagination of what you can think of. And therefore, it is of utmost importance that basically you get somehow a handle on those kind of things. Clearly, artificial intelligence is part of it, because simply you have to give some how shall I say, some prescriptions to those connected devices, and hopefully they don't escape to you in the sort of that you have the end of the world type of scenarios. But clearly, it is of utmost importance that basically you have the devices or all the things that you think that should have somehow be a connecting role, that they are basically supported with well-controlled algorithms in a way that things can go through. And I believe that these, if it's properly done, they can have a very pronounced effect towards changing our world and to the better, because basically you can induce those items for basically for productive purposes. I mean, also here, you can have many imagination of what you can think about. I mean, in a sort of for an aging society, for instance, when basically you will start to have to think about that you don't have enough basically support to help people when they're aging, and so it can have very profound also ethical configurations in terms of how we think about things. So I think, I mean, again, it is a very wide area, but it's very fascinating to think about it.
Thank you so much. Mr. Chirițoiu?
Well, fascinating, yes, but it takes me out of my comfort zone. So I'll go outside my brief. I don't know that much about technology, but I love history. So when I look what is happening now, to me looks what I expect is going to be something similar to 19th century, maybe quicker. That's why I think more about the artificial intelligence of having something similar to the Industrial Revolution. And then if I look at what happened in 19th century, in the early 20th century, I think we have to find a smarter way to help people adapt to these changes and compensate the losers. As much as I don't like this idea, I think something like this will be needed.
Thank you so much, and I'll come back to your comment. Please.
Well, I'll not bet on the most disruptive technology. What I can say about our company that we focus on artificial intelligence. We started with machine learning, and we have some products about which we are quite proud. We use the AI for risk assessment for the products different sellers upload on the platform. In the same time, we developed a tool for translation because our will is to help small companies, SMEs mainly from Central and Eastern Europe, to go cross-border. So we have some natural barriers in European Union, such as languages, currencies, and so on. So we have this translation tool, which is mainly based on AI. In the same time, we have search engine and so on. So it's important for us. We focus on it. We work more than 250 terabytes per day of data in this regard. So in our ecosystem, it's important. But just a few words about the fact that in order to develop AI, you need data. And what Mr. Chirițoiu said earlier about GDPR and the way it impacted us, I would develop it a little bit in the sense that it seems that it creates additional barriers in order to gather those data and in order to use it later for developing dimension tools. And in the same time, in the pipeline, we expect e-privacy, which is a special law for cookies and for other type of data. So I think that in this regard, it's important to put those kind of legislation in the context. And from the discussions at Brussels level with DG Comp, we see that there is a need of sharing the private data, but in the same time, because of GDPR, that's a difficult exercise. And in this manner, I would add a few words about dimension, because we don't need to be afraid of dimension, because if you do not have dimension in digital world, you are not relevant. It's not like having, let's say, e-commerce platform similar to a small web shop at the corner of the street. In order to exist as a platform, you need the two sides of the platform to be huge in order to reach the demand of those two sides. So I don't know what's going to be the most disruptive, but we need to put the things in the context, and we need to be more efficient with data.
I think we had some great answers to some very important questions, and I will pick on one of them which I find very, very important. Starting from the comment of Mr. Chirițoiu, we have all these technologies and all these trends which are affecting our lives. We discussed about the success Romania has, just as an example, in information technology, with I think around 6% of the GDP of Romania in ICT sector. But in the same time, we've heard in the first speeches, I think Mr. John talked about the gap, the growing gap between different parts of the society. So now the question is the following, or the challenge is the following. I don't know if I can formulate it as a question. How is the digital economy, how is the technology affecting the inequality gap? Is it growing? Is it something perceived as growing or not? And if it's growing, how can we protect jobs? How can we create that safe social environment which in the end is necessary for any healthy society? So we can start from this part just to change a bit the order of the answers.
Well, I think that there is a situation with this revolution 4.0, which is very similar to the Industrial Revolution, and there were some lessons that we could adapt to nowadays, and we could create big value for the society in general. Because during the Industrial Revolution in the US, about 1 in 3 people, workers, would work on a farm, and now there are less than 10% of the workers working in agriculture, and they are producing much more food. So, of course, there is a period which is a difficult one, but the lesson from that situation is that at that time, US decided to create schools in order to educate people, in order to prepare them for Industrial Revolution. But now we have schools, so what we need to do now is to change the schools, or to adapt the schools in order to be in line with the realities of today. Because, I mean, we cannot avoid it. The technology happens, and you can run away, but still it will happen. And if you are not aware and you'll avoid doing some steps in order to adapt, then it's a game that will be lost most probably. And just to give you some numbers, if comparing our company as a e-commerce company, we are more productive twice than a usual retailer, and in the same time the salaries in our sector are more than twice bigger than in a traditional retail. And this is according to a study of the Economic Academy of Bucharest. So it is clear that the innovation and technology will bring more value to the society, and from this value, the state will progress. But in the same regard, the government needs to assess the situation and to do changes.
Thank you.
Well, another great question out of my area, and sorry, I don't know, because my expectation would be there's going to be a shock, and we have to find ways to help people cope with the shock. On the other hand, if I look at least on the short run, inequality, is it maybe Romania? It's a bit more unequal than other countries, but by and large, inequality is not growing, as far as I know. Gini coefficients are not extraordinarily bad in Europe in general, and in the case of Romania. So I don't see inequality as a big issue. Employment, record level in many countries in Europe, not the whole Europe, but there are countries in Western Europe, record level of employment. Romania, shortage of labor. Lots of companies complain in Bucharest, in Transylvania especially, they cannot find labor force. Same situation in a number of other Eastern European countries. So, is there high risk of unemployment? Doesn't seem to be for the moment. Penetration, okay, we have good infrastructure on IT in Romania. You have broadband, which is basically available everywhere. Also, television, cable television, phones, they have a very good penetration, and they got, the people adapted or took them very easily, very early. So does it mean Romanian public does not have the skills to use new technologies? Doesn't seem to be so. On the other hand, it's true. For whatever reason, we don't have that much business interest. There are not that many services, and here Romania is doing poorly, that we do not use this infrastructure to provide services for our public. So, but anyway, in the short run, my expectations are not met. I don't see the problems. I still think that they are going to come. And probably what we have to do is prepare better education, prepare better skills for people. But there is a mismatch between my expectations and the empirical evidence, and I'm trying to be empirically driven.
Thank you so much.
Yes, it's a very difficult question. I mean, with new technologies, with technological revolutions, there become new risks, new threats, new opportunities, and this is exactly for inequality. Now, first of all, you have to define what you refer as inequality. If it inequality of in terms of revenues, is it inequality in terms of wealth? Is it inequality in terms of opportunities? Because that's very often the key challenge when you talk about revolutions. Are there, with the revolutions, some parts of society by definition excluded or disadvantaged by these new technological options? That's here, with digital revolution, it's very clear that basically you have to be digital literacy to take part of it, because otherwise you're immediately excluded from the outset. And what's more, digital revolution is a world of intangible assets. I mean, before there was the example of farming. I mean, it's pretty clear how is inequality in farming. You can define it by plot of land or of how much you get out in terms of what's at the end of the crop or things like that. There you can have tangible goods where you can define inequality. But how do you define digital wealth? I mean, you can see that somebody like Mark Zuckerberg became extremely rich within a very, very short time. So, but how did he manage to get this? A farmer could never have thought about it in such a way. So you have basically a digital world is very often a wealth on claims. So, and these claims, as they appear, they can immediately the next day disappear. So things can be very, very volatile as well. So, in terms of inequality, you can have that it could trend towards a very strong inequality. Example of Mark Zuckerberg. You can have many other things that simply very few sort of winner-takes-all features can basically create huge inequalities. And therefore, there is a challenge for the state to basically to compensate for that. So basically, the public sector will have to look at those things with an increased attention. I mean, it's not by chance that basically in several countries, basically concepts like guaranteed revenues or minimum revenue for each citizens are thought about. It's precisely to basically make sure that you would not have an increasing degree of inequality which somehow undermines the political and the social tissue. So very pertinent question, and it's very difficult to find a good answer.
Thank you so much.
Yes, so it's definitely a challenge. And so what we are observing also in Romania and actually across Europe, two trends. So the first trend is we have very strong like startups and part of society which is highly tech savvy and is actually the real innovators. Yeah? So for instance, in Cluj, the minister mentioned we, together with the Romanian government, hosted the EU Startup Summit. And you know, there are 3 unicorns in Romania. And yes, UiPath, for instance, yeah, but there are others as well. And basically, but the key challenge is that 46% of the most creative minds and in entrepreneurs are receiving financing investment from outside Europe and are leaving Europe. So UiPath, for instance, relocated to New York City. So basically, and then second, we have the trend, so how do we basically have digitalization of traditional sectors and traditional companies and of society overall? So there's this huge gap. So we call this digital for the shoemaker. So we are launching a program this fall, the European Commission. It's specifically to support microloans for the digitalization of SMEs. So these are very small, up to 150,000 euros. So these are loans you can apply to through your bank, but it's actually European funded. Because the issue is that the risk is much too high. No commercial bank gives you money, gives you a loan for a digitalization project. So if you are, say, a shoemaker or a small manufacturing company, and you want to completely change your business model, introduce digital into the way you do things, you don't get access to finance. You just don't. That's why we actually put up a guarantee of over 70% from EU resources to provide funding for small businesses. And the second we are seeing, and tomorrow we are launching also here at the Digital Assembly, the Digital Innovation and Scale-Up Initiative, specifically focused for Central, Eastern, and Southeast Europe. Why is that? Because, as was mentioned by Juan Navas in the beginning, we do see the increasing gap, unfortunately, between the region, Central Eastern Europe, and other parts of Europe. And thus, we feel that there is a strong need to give special focus and investments for digital innovations and the scale-up of businesses in the region. So this program works together with the World Bank, the EIB, the EBRD, and the European Commission in designing such a program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I think you just gave us some great news, because one of the challenges I know Romanian companies, small companies have is exactly this one, getting access to capital to finance their activities in general, but the digitization of their activities in particular. So we are approaching the end of our panel. We started a bit later, but I think we should be good European citizens and give some time back to the conference. But before we finish, I would like to open up the discussion for Q&A. So I think it's good if we can have a few questions from the audience, because the discussion until now was absolutely fascinating, at least from my point of view. So if you have any questions, now is the time to ask. So please. No questions? It means that we were very, very transparent and concise. So if we have 5 more minutes planned for questions, I would like to address one more question, and if we can be very short on that. And I would like to start from what Mr. Joan was saying about the deep waters of population. We've seen in the recent EU elections the rise of one specific party. So I don't want to make politics here. I'm referring to the Green Party, which is supporting many environmental ideas. Usually technology is seen as affecting the environment sometimes in a negative way. Climate change is a topic, a hot topic, and it's considered by some people one of the biggest challenges or sometimes threats to our civilizations. Speaking in this context of digital single market, how do you see this threat, and how European Union should tackle it? Some short comments, if you can.
So we are working on a strategy. And the first is, we call it greening ICTs. So for instance, microchips. So we're actually working towards a European microchip, and the idea would be that this is a energy efficient one. So that's the first. Like you think about data centers. You know, all this data we mentioned, I've mentioned 200, 300 terabyte of data. So tremendous amount of data processing, but data centers, huge, unbelievable amount of energy. So the first is greening of ICT, so to make basically the data centers more energy efficient, also use renewable energy for that. And then second, to use digital as a tool to support climate change action. Very concretely, carbon trading needs a lot of monitoring and evaluation. You have to verify whether in fact a company or a government in fact is reducing carbon emissions. For that, you can use technology, digital, very effectively, say GIS, geographic information systems. We also experimented with citizen feedback, where citizens can actually crowdsource data and measure data, saying pollution, air pollution. Students could use cell phones in order to measure the data points. And, but we are working on that, but it's one of the big important priorities for the new commission.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, the bad news is that the digital sector increases the CO2 footprint. That's the thing. It's direct impact because the world gets more digitalized. There's more data centers out there and things like that. Never mind that those data centers become much more energy efficient. That seems if you calculate it, say per data bit processed, it consumes much less energy from year to year. But it's simply the sheer amount of the increase of the data that overwhelms this energy efficiency effect. So on that, you have basically that the footprint is increasing. But on the other hand, you can see also the opportunities that digitalization brings along. Just think about, if you start thinking about that people can replace business travel to some degree by video conferencing. If you can start thinking about people commuting to work with teleworking opportunities, and you can think of many, many things that basically certain processes which are energy intensive can be translated into the digital world with a very small, tiny amount of energy consumption. So if the world gets more digital, there is the scope for basically creating huge energy savings in a way that digital is actually part of the solution. It's not part of the problem, it is part of the solution.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm also on this view that by and large I expect more digitization to be more sustainable in terms of environment, and I think also transport costs. If you need less people to work, then wages are not that important, and then you could have relocation already happening. Yeah? You have relocation of businesses in developed countries, US at least, yeah, and also a bit in Europe. This means you don't have to transport everything from China. You produce a lot of things locally. So I think that's going to save a lot of energy and decrease negative impact on the environment. On the other hand, I'm in two minds about the green movement. I could see this fancy green movement, silicon type of people, yeah, who are going to be very pro-technology and also green, and I could also imagine green people who are going to be nostalgic, romantic, and they're going to be anti-technology. So I think it's the green movement is a sword that cuts both ways.
Thank you.
So just to avoid any doubts, my feedback is not toward a particular party, so not to Greens. I would say that first of all, e-commerce, the sector from where I come, is about no papers. And in addition, there was a study of the Bucharest Economic University, which said that in 2017, taking into consideration a number of 67 million of orders, there were saved about 100 trees because the parcels are delivered together somehow. And in the same time, during the 2017, the carbon emissions were low because of e-commerce by 40,000 tons. And a few words also about lockers, because we started to develop this type of delivery, and there is a Polish study that shows that a delivery to a lockers to a locker actually saves more than 20% for the carbon emission. So actually e-commerce is also focused on saving the planet, and it's somehow by default the way this industry works, because we do not have the entire structure of shops, for instance, and the warehouses are built in a way to be more efficient from energy consumption point of view. So technology is about actually saving the planet as well, and which is maybe more important is the fact that we became aware of the negative impact we do as humans, and we work into that direction.
Thank you so much. I think we should end in a very positive note. I think we've heard some challenges, but in the same time, I'm happy to notice the same positive attitude and positive approach you mentioned in the beginning. Yes, we have challenges, but in the same time, we know where we want to go, we know the direction, and I think we are aware of the barriers, and we have solutions, we have the capacity to create a better society. I would like to thank the distinguished panelists for this discussion. I would like to thank you for your attention. Again, thank you to the Aspen Institute and to the Romanian government and to all the people who participated and are participating in this event. We have a short break, but before break, I would like to inform you that after the break, we have the keynote speech of our distinguished guest, Maria Gabriel, European Commissioner for Digital Economy and Society. Thank you so much, and enjoy the day.